Hello and welcome to Her Matters. I am your host. My name is Chioma Omero.
Culture of silence. Again, silence, because if you even try to say, oh, he did this to me, she did this to me, people then say, where's your proof? Are you sure?
Now, what I've seen is parents are not talking to their daughters and their sons. They are not talking to them.
So when people now think that if someone in the medical profession or in healthcare or in that field carries out the process, it would be safer.
The other part of it is the way we structured our healthcare system to actually selectively, remove these paid medicine vendors out of the entire health loop. We don't officially recognize them, but there's a significant role they have to play.
Hello and welcome to Her Matters. I am your host. My name is Chioma Omero. Her Matters is a talk show series that focuses primarily on all issues affecting women across the globe. Now today, our topic is youth, sexual reproductive health and rights. And joining us virtually via Zoom is our guest, Margaret Bolaji. Thank you so much for joining us, Margaret. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you indeed. And Margaret Bolaji is a social worker who works with sexual and reproductive health and rights, especially in the age group of the adolescents or the youth or the young people. Welcome to Her Matters, Margaret. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's amazing being on the same show with you, Chioma.
So I want to go ahead and dive right in. We know that youth sexual health and reproductive health is sort of a very touchy subject because you don't want to put youth and sex here in Nigeria in the same sentence. So why do you think that these two words, youth and sex, are seen as polar opposites? Why is there such an aversion to talk about youth and sex? Because in actuality, they are quite close, those two words, because we know what's happening in our world today. But why do you think that is such a almost taboo connection between youth and sexual health or sexual reproductive health?
Thank you, Chioma. And maybe it would be great to just start by defining what sexual and reproductive health and right is. I mean, whether even for young people or for an adult. And according to Lancet's Commission on Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights 2018, it defines it as a state of physical, emotional, mental, social well-being in relation to all aspects of sexuality and reproduction, not merely the absence of disease, dysfunction, or infirmity. So again, if we then put this together, side by side, adolescent and youth, then you wonder why we would not want to talk about issues like this. A very quick fact is that the proportion of unmarried young people that have begun or have engaged in sex within the past 6 months, according to the National Demographic Health Survey 2018, it's actually 35.1% among males and 25.9% among females. What does that tell us? If you have 10 females, it means 3 out of those 10 who are married have engaged in sex in the past 12 months. So why exactly are we not talking about this issue? It almost looked like to me, it's like before you get married, you should be non-sexual, like you should not know nothing. And that immediately after the wedding, you should become sexual. So talking about the abortion, the issue is social cultural issues, religious issue, but importantly is that people need to have, and I mean adolescents and youth, need to have adequate and accurate information about their sexual and reproductive health and right to be healthy, to be able to fulfill their potentials and be able to really say, oh, this is when I'm ready and when I want to engage in it. But if we keep quiet about it, then it means that they can go on and on, be uninformed, and that will lead to several consequences, which I believe we're going to still talk about.
So as you said that, so how early in the life of a woman is sexual and reproductive health supposed to be a concern? How early?
when we talk about sexual and reproductive health, particularly on sex education, we begin to talk about age appropriate. And that's to say that there is no time that it's too early and there is no time that is too late. Of course, when you look at reproduction, not just the sexual part, we know women of reproductive age are 15 to 49. However, we've also seen a lot of things happening, because when you talk about issue on gender-based violence, rape, it happens to children, unfortunately, very sadly. And that's why your 3-year-old child, as soon as they begin to start talking, they need to know, this is my private part, this is what it is called, this is when someone touches it, you say no, you report to mommy. That's part of sexual and reproductive health. So it just needs to be age appropriate, but there is no age limit, there is no time that is too early, and there's no time that is too late to talk to young people or even everyone about sexual and reproductive health and rights.
Okay. When we talk about even educating our children, right? When you look beyond the classroom or academic curriculum, is there a strong case for sex education in Nigeria?
In Nigeria, the word sex education, it's quite very sensitive, and that's why several years ago, when we began to talk about importance of talking about sexual and reproductive health, the Nigeria government accepted, particularly through the Federal Ministry of Health, to begin to work on we call it family health and HIV education, FLHE, and this is expected to be in every school, secondary school. And it's meant to teach young people about their sexual and reproductive health. But there are two issues with it as we speak. One is the fact that this curriculum is not adequate in providing the information, looking at the current trends of sexual and reproductive health and rights issues. Another issue with it is several teachers are not trained on how to use this curriculum. So you find out that even the teacher themselves are not comfortable. So I remember entering biology class in my own time. It was even the FLHE curriculum. And the teacher got to the blackboard and then said, today we're going to treat a topic. She hasn't written down the topic. And she said, no question, no suggestion, no side talk, no smile, no laugh, a lot of rules. And then she dived down into reproduction and went on and on. And, you know, there were a lot of questions in my head I couldn't ask. And in fact, she dare not catches you to even be smiling at some of the things she was calling. So again, teachers need to be trained. More teachers need to be trained. So those are the issues. But of course, we have to give kudos to the Nigerian government for even begin to say, oh, it's okay to bring in FLHI, which is family life and HIV health. But again, how many schools are implementing this curriculum? And this curriculum is currently under review to ensure that it provides adequate and accurate information that young people can have access to and be able to make informed choices. For me, that's the key thing, that people have enough information to make informed choices about their sexual and reproductive health and rights.
And of course, we know that, you know, the government or the Constitution does protect the basic freedoms of its citizens, right? And that includes the freedom of choice of what to do with your body. But we have female genital mutilation, which goes ahead and violates that whole bodily autonomy situation, like literally, because a lot of the women are mutilated without their consent, under duress, because of culture, or they are coerced by culture or by family values, whatever it is. So what's your take on that? Because it seems like we're in a place where we have rights, but then we don't have rights. So what's your take on that?
Unfortunately, right, when we look at our Constitution, I know it's like we need to review, but importantly, look at different policies. If we even start by implementing what is already there, we have the Child Rights Act of 2013. How many states have domesticated it? And also in domesticating this Child Rights Act, how are we also watering down the content and taking away women's angles, autonomy from them? Because when we continue to, I love my culture, I love African culture, I love being a Nigerian, but we have to admit that we have harmful cultural practices. And female genital mutilation is one of them. It has no health benefits whatsoever. It also takes away the woman's ability to decide for herself. So it should never be practiced. But the issue is, if you say, yes, they do have the right, when those rights are violated, are the perpetrators brought to book? We have the VAP law, that's the Violence Against Person Prohibition Act. These issues are clearly stated there, the penalty. But how are we ensuring enforcement of this penalty? And so long as we continue to keep quiet and fold our hands and do nothing about it, then it will continue to grow, because then it feels like it's just there in paper, it's just on the shelf, nobody's going to hold you accountable to it. And that's why we need to continue to hold our government accountable. Perpetrators need to be brought to book. I've seen people even pride in the fact that they can do FGM and go scot-free. But these are clear statements in the Constitution, in the law, that needs to be punished when it's been done. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And that's why all hands must be on deck. It's not just the social worker, it's not just developmentalists, it's not just the media, which is very important, but even the forces, the armed forces, the police, everyone needs to ensure that we are making sure that perpetrators are brought to book when such happens.
Okay, so speaking of perpetration of sexual violence on anyone, we have confirmed reports of violations against scores of young girls who are kidnapped all over the country. We've heard of so many incidences to that regard, or in that regard. Now, how do these violations affect these young people? How do you think it affects them?
It's really very sad. When I have conversations with girls, I particularly, through Stand With a Girl initiative, we work at internally displaced persons camp. And when girls begin to talk about the ordeal they had to go through with the insurgency, banditry, and all of the insecurity in the country, it's sad because, one, the trauma, just knowing that your right, your body was taken by force without your consent, and just the nightmare, the way it continued to replay, it's sad enough. Now, when it then results into unplanned pregnancy, those are young girls who are expected to be in school. Most of them drop out of school. Again, because they drop out of school, it reduces their chances of employment. We know this is Nigeria, with your full degree, 2 degrees, master's, PhD, you're struggling to get employment. How much more when you're limited? I mean, your education is just cut short, because there's so much, like raising a child, it's not beans, it's a lot of responsibility. And then you find yourself in a community where people then begin to even say, maybe it's a fault. Maybe she wasn't well dressed, or maybe she was the one, she attracted it, or whatsoever. Those are trauma, those are issues that girls continue to face. But importantly is that it continued to stop them from fulfilling their full potential. Yes, it's easier to say you can pick up life, you can start again, but how easy the cycle of poverty then continues. The mother probably had similar issues, and the daughter is trying to fend for herself, go to school. It's just a whole lot of issues compounded together just by being unable to put, and that's why we need to stop it. Perpetrators, again, needs to be brought to book and ensure that girls feel safe. Most girls go on the street feeling, one girl particularly told me when what do you dread the most? Said, when I wake up in the morning and I take a step out of my house, I'm not sure what it's in the day for me. And for some, even right in the house, it happens. So what can I do? And it's sad, but we need to continue to make sure that we play our role and ensure that girls are safe. It is their right, it is their need. And we have to continue to make sure we find an enabling environment where they can strive and be all that they've been created to be.
Now, I'm so glad that you touched on that, because my next question has a lot to do with that, because we can only imagine the kind of trauma people who have experienced sexual violations go through. Now you want to add to that trauma conception or having a child out of rape, things like, and some of the I don't want to call them victims, some of these survivors never recover from the trauma that they go through. Now, it's almost like when you talk about the government and enforcing laws that have to do, and then you have, let's not even talk about, they say there's a ban on abortions unless the mother's life is at risk. So you can't even abort a child that you're going to have that came from rape or that came from some sort of violation. I want to pick your brain. Like, I know what I think about it. What do you think about it?
It's another difficult scenario, because at times I just wish that our policymakers can try, and I mean try, to put themselves in the shoes of those girls and women. So while I am a Christian, I'm proudly one, but I tell people, what would you rather have? You don't want to legalize abortion, but when we look at the data, several scores of unsafe abortion are being implemented every year, every day, and girls lose their lives. I don't know if God is smiling at us, really, because when you really look at the situation, those are situations that they never expected themselves to be in. And also even looking at it from the lens of the rights perspective, we all have the right to our bodies and decide what we want to do with it. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And that's why you hear a lot, you have no idea, crude methods that women use just to be able to terminate pregnancies. So either you're legalizing or not, it keeps happening. Unfortunately, quack. That's where they go to be able to access such services. So for me, it's always empathy would always come first for me before whatever law comes in. So would you try to put yourself in the shoes of those women, in the shoes of those girls, and ensure that people have access to information and services that save life? So for me, life first. I know that we continue to say, oh, but this, that, and all of that. So it's really important that we continue to see how best we can support women and girls and make sure that they're able to make the right decisions. And then whenever they need the backing to be able to make that, they get that backing to make the right decision that saves lives. So for me, it's about saving lives. If we keep losing girls, losing women to unsafe abortion every year, then something is wrong. We can't keep doing the same thing the same way and expect a different result. Then we need to even speak with them the more and see from their own perspective.
Now, according to UNICEF, 6 out of every 10 children experiences some form of violence. When you talk about, let's say, a number of like 100 children, fewer than 5 of them, received any form of support whatsoever, like no form of support whatsoever. Now, I can only imagine how damaging that can be to the psyche of anybody, talk less of a child. So I want you to just talk to us a little bit about how damaging sexual violence can be for people, one, particularly women, to their sexual and reproductive health. But I want you to talk to us about short-term versus long-term damage, or not versus, but short-term and long-term damage.
That report, we know that issue around violence is underreported, where we have a culture of silence. Again, silence, because if you even try to say, oh, he did this to me, she did this to me, people then say, where's your proof? Are you sure? Where were you? What were you wearing? A lot of other questions.
Or it happened a long time ago. Why are you reporting it now? That's even a different story. Yeah.
Or you can imagine that people then summon the courage by any means to even say, this has happened to me. And disappointedly, there is no any kind of support. That in itself is traumatizing. That, oh, you felt, oh, you had to, I can imagine what it means for you to even decide to open up and say, this happened to me. And then you don't get the needed support that you're supposed to. So one is the trauma. And again, the experience, the flashback, everything continues to play in your head. And you wonder, oh, which you should never do. If there's anybody that needs to be blamed, of course there's someone that needs to be blamed, is the perpetrator. But then the society tells you why it was because, oh, your mouth is too, you're just running your mouth, that's why they did this to you, and all of that. So that's bad enough. Another effect, just like we were talking, it's also unplanned pregnancy for women. So for some of them, they go about with pregnancy and then it just shows up. Ideally, you should have access to health services. These are part of the support, right? Again, we have the sexual transmitted infections, HIV. So some persons even do that's and just even be able to have access to care that you need. That's another issue. The bigger picture at the long run is that even for their sexual and reproductive health, people might end up going on their lives and never be interested in having any sexual experience and say, oh, it wasn't, I didn't ask for it. I wasn't ready for it at the time it happened, and I'm just not interested anymore. That's it. And everyone has the right to enjoy sex when they decide for themselves that they're ready to have it. But because of this experience, it then gets into their way and even their psyche. Another thing is the fact that we all have dreams. So you have things planned out to do, when to do it. Imagine having a child and then you have to raise the child, you have to hold on your school, or for some person, they never get that opportunity to go back to school. The resources is not there. And then at the long run, you're unable to fulfill your dreams. But unfortunately, and that's for me, what caps it is death. Because some persons, because again, they want to abort the babies. You can imagine just having a child from someone that maybe you can't even recognize the person, but for you, what that child represents is that scenario, is that event. And then in the quest for seeking for abortion, you get an unsafe abortion, and it may lead to death. For some, it's also that it destroys some of their reproductive organs, but finally, for some, they've lost their lives. So it's a ripple effect, and that's why nobody deserves to go through any form of violence whatsoever.
What we're about to talk about now is not considered violation in some certain areas, but it says that Nigeria has the largest number of child brides in Africa, with more than 23 million girls and women who were married off as children. And most of them were from poor and rural communities, right? So that's almost a quarter of the population of women in Nigeria. And then there are projections that this will grow to at least 6% by the year 2030. Those numbers are staggering. Now, what are the downsides of child marriage? And that's in relationship to sexual and reproductive health.
Thank you so much, and good question. To start with, like, child marriage is child marriage. So it means that you have a child who, by our constitution, when you're below 18, you're a minor, you can't even give consent. So in the first place, how did that happen? Because you're not consenting, you're not an adult that can consent to it. At the most, you can give an assent, and then your parent can then give. But in this case, is even taking the right, the innocence, the childhood of that child away by making them a child bride. That's one. The second thing is also the fact that at this point, not for every, I know that when it comes to issue around poverty, it ranges from, in fact, these days it's from 8 to 15 and even 16, depending on, but most times we've seen that child brides, when they then get married and then become pregnant, most times they do not even have that opportunity to decide for themselves when they want to start having children. Is the husband will decide it's time, and how dare you even talk about contraceptive? Like, I mean, because these are also part of their rights that are being taken away. And then they become pregnant. And because their pelvis is absolutely too narrow during delivery, too small. Yes, during delivery, what happens? Vesicovaginal fistula. And then they begin to pass urine uncontrollably. That is still sexual and reproductive health. Or then, even when they survive it, they have children. And then you have a child taking care of another child. You can, even for an adult, I mean, raising a child is not moi, I have to tell you. So it takes a lot from you. So you can imagine what it means for a child to do that. Unfortunately, the Child Rights Act 2013 states this very clearly, but because of the way the Nigerian system works, that's at the federal level. So each state would have to domesticate it. Several states, particularly in the northern part of Nigeria, have not domesticated it due to religious, cultural beliefs. And in some cases, they've had to water down the Child Rights Act and still put in some parts. But the truth is, if you're truly interested in the well-being, in the health, the education, the development of the girl child, then it would be very important to understand that. I've even seen legislators, and I mean decision maker, pride in the fact that they have underage children. Who does that? And that's why, honestly, for me, until we start making sure perpetrators are being brought to book, things will continue to happen, and it will just look like we're just in a state where people just do what they like and just pick what part of the Constitution suits them and continue to go. Again, talking about child marriage in Nigeria, the Constitution is very clear about it. If you're below 18, you're still a child, you're a minor, and ideally you can consent. Unfortunately, if you look at it, that is most likely at the federal level, and then states have to domesticate it. But in most states, particularly in northern Nigeria, we've seen how that domestication is still a strong hurdle. For some states that have domesticated it, it's been watered down. But it's important to understand that when a child gets married and then you're expecting the child to now give birth to another child, it's a huge responsibility. And also medically, you know that most girls at that point, their pelvis are still immature, and having babies could lead to vesicovaginal fistula and also social connection. So you detach this young girl from her peers and she's unable to have that interaction. For some of them, they can't even make that decision on when they want to have their children, and even the space in between. All of these are very important to ensuring that the girl achieve her full potential. But when that's autonomy, that right is taken away from her, then it just leave her to then at the mercy of the man, who usually it's even older, I mean way older than her. But for me, importantly, is that we need to see how best to implement our policies, our laws, and perpetrators need to be brought to book when such happens.
Wow, thank you so much for just being here on Her Matters. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge with us, Margaret. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chioma. It's been nice being on this with you. All right, bye.
And that's our episode on Her Matters. We'd like to say a very big thank you to, first of all, our principal partners, Worthy. We want to say a big thank you for this beautiful space, the Herbert Wigwe Foundation, and of course, to Hasty Health Initiative. Thank you so much for joining us. Now be safe and take care of yourselves.